So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I just want to briefly go through what we spoke about last week, just so that we all have the same base knowledge. So last week we talked about part 1 and part 2, which is leap months, leap years, how often, how long is a year. We talked about the first dichia or rule. We talked about lo adu rosh. We talked about, and we ended up with the 14 different types of years that are possible. So I'm just going to briefly review that, and then we'll continue with part 3, and we'll see how far we get into part 4 today. Part 3 is really the longest part because it sort of determines which one of those 14 years you use. So last week we talked about chalakim, which are 1/1080th of an hour, or about 3 1/3 seconds. We talked about how the way that they knew with precision how long a lunar month was because of different eclipses. So all solar eclipses always happen at the new moon, and all lunar eclipses always happen at the full moon. So I'm just going to mute everyone. Okay. All solar eclipses always happen at a new moon, and all lunar eclipses happen at a full moon, which means that if you take 2 solar eclipses and you divide by the number of months between each eclipse, you can tell exactly how long a month is. We talked about why we need a leap year. We talked about how 354 approximate days is 12 lunar months, and if you don't add a leap year every so often, add another month, you actually end up with losing time. The Muslim calendar, for example, Ramadan moves approximately 11 days every single year. And so their holidays can happen at any time of the year, but the Torah mandates that we must have Pesach in the spring. And so we add leap months in order to maintain that balance. And so the rabbis created the 19-year cycle. People know that their birthday pretty much happens on the same day every 19 years. Their Hebrew birthday and their secular birthday match up, and it comes out perfectly. It doesn't always happen. It can be plus or minus 1 day, but it's always plus or minus 1 day. And we talked about when to add those, and the answer was that we add them after every time when the loss of time, that 11 days per year, 10 days and 21 hours, adds up to approximately a month. So we add them in year 3, year 6, year 8, year 11, year 14, 17, and 19. We're in year 4 right now, which is why it's not a leap year. Although some Rebbeim, some farmer in Israel actually sued the Supreme Court of Israel to get them to declare it a leap year. The Supreme Court said, we don't have the authority, we're not the Sanhedrin. So we're in 5780. 5780 is year 4, and we base it based on year 1. Year 1, 57 and 79 years ago, was year 1 of the cycle, and then we just add from there. Even though the cycle didn't really exist then, we pretend that it does. So we talked about how 29 days and 12 hours and 44 minutes is really not an even number. We talked about how we have alternating months of 29 and 30 days. We talked about how we had to have some variable because 29 days and 12 hours and 44 minutes is 44 minutes off of exactly even 29 and 30. And those months that are variable are Cheshvan and Kislev. And so those were picked because they are the months right after the Tishrei Chagim, and it means that every holiday is linked back to the previous Pesach. And we talked about how pretty much they alternate. So Nisan is 30, Iyar is 29, Sivan is 30, Tammuz is 29, et cetera, until you get to Cheshvan and Kislev, which are alternating of 29 and 30 days normally. But they can be different. So we talked about Cheserim, which is the years where Cheshvan and Kislev are both 29. That's a short year. We talked about Kisidron, which is, if you go back, alternating years, so alternating months. So Cheshvan would be 29 and Kislev would be 30. And we talked about that, how that's Kisidron. That's as if it should be. And Shlemim, where both of them are 30. This year was a Shlemim year. Both Cheshvan and Kislev were 30 days. But then we have also leap years and not leap years. So really we have 6 different lengths of the year. We have 353 or 383 are both Cheserim years. 354 and 384 are Kesidron years, and 355 and 385 are Shlemim years. We also talked about how Shlemim Shana Muberes, which is 385, is a unique number in that it's divisible by 7, which means that Rosh Hashanah will be on the same day 2 years in a row, which actually happens quite frequently. Then we talked about, the second part was about Pesach, and we talked about the three-digit codification of the year. So we talked about Atbash. I'm not going to cover all of Atbash right now, but it's easy to understand. Aleph corresponds to a holiday that starts with a tuf, etc., etc. So you can see here that each of those days of Pesach corresponds to a different day. That's why people can know very quickly, based on what day Pesach is, what every other holiday will happen, except for Hanukkah. We talked about the three-letter label for a year. So this year is a B'Shah year. B'Shah meaning bet for the day of the week that Rosh Hashanah was. It was on a Monday. It was a Shlemim year. Both Cheshvan and Kislev were 30 days. And Pesach this year, if you know, will be on Thursday, which means that this year is a B'Shah year. We talked about the first rule. The first rule is really the second rule, but the first rule is Lo Adu Rosh. Rosh Hashanah, we never allow to happen on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, and for various reasons. But at this point, just understand that Rosh Hashanah can never fall out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Pesach, therefore, because Pesach is always 2 days before Rosh Hashanah, can never fall out on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. And so we talked about how, based on those different rules, we can eliminate certain types of years. For example, a Bakad year, a Monday Kesidron Wednesday year, is impossible because Lo Badu Rosh, therefore Pesach cannot fall out on Wednesday, therefore Bakad years are out. It leaves us with 14 different possibilities, really 15 different possibilities, and today we're going to understand why a Gesha year, a Gimel Shin Aleph year, is impossible. So we're actually going to come to that today, I hope. So you'll understand why, even though there are 15 here that are not crossed out, actually there are only 14 that ever actually happen. So, and there's no correspondence with the different years. So the 19-year cycle and the 14 different types of years actually have nothing to do with each other. And the whole thing actually repeats every 689,472 years. Okay, so now let's cover what we wanted. Let's go into the new material. So today we're going to talk about Moladim. Molad, what is a Molad? The Molad of Tishrei. We're going to talk about a very particular Molad, which is called Baharad or Molad Tohu. And then we're going to talk about how that relates to exactly when Rosh Hashanah is. Because when Rosh Hashanah is determines everything about the calendar. So the Molad is the exact moment that the moon is at minimal reflection. So that means if you go back to slide number 4, I'm sorry, you'll see that at a new moon, the Earth is directly in the path is opposite of the moon, and therefore we don't see any of the sunlight that is reflecting onto the moon. Just going to continue back on. Okay, went too far. Okay, we announced the Molad in Shul for every month, the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh, except Tishrei, and of course, except this past month when we weren't in Shul. We announced it based on Jerusalem time, but not really. We actually based upon the idea that if midday in Jerusalem was at noon, but midday in Jerusalem is not really at noon, because Jerusalem is very far east in its time zone, which means that actually midday in Jerusalem on standard time is at about 11:40, and it doesn't account for daylight saving time, and it's based on exactly a 12-hour day. That means sundown at 6 p.m. and sunrise at 6 a.m., all of which never actually happen. And so what we announce in Shul is a very idealized form of when that happens. So for example, this month, we used to announce it by saying Shlishi 16/2/63, which meant Monday night or Tuesday, that's the third day. 16 hours means 16 hours after the start of the average day. But when does the halachic day start? It actually starts in the evening. So it's, in this case, 6 p.m., because that's the idyllic day, plus 16 hours, that would be 10 a.m. And 263 chalakim is approximately, well, is exactly 14 minutes and 11 chalakim. So therefore, we announce it, and when you saw it in the email from Shul's, it was Tuesday morning at 10:14 a.m. and 11 chalakim, which has absolutely nothing to do with when the moon actually was at its minimal inflection. The molad is approximate and an average. The moon's path around the Earth actually wobbles quite substantially throughout the course of the year, and so it's just an average. The actual time of least reflection was about 5 hours earlier, actually, in actual time. This is the actual time. It was Tuesday at 5:28 a.m. and 0 chalakim at Jerusalem. So here in Atlanta, it was actually on Monday night. Okay. So we announce the molad every single month in Shul, but it doesn't actually determine anything about when Rosh Chodesh is. It only determines things for Kiddush Levana. The Kiddush Levana has to be after a certain number of days after the molad and before a certain number of days after the molad. Tishrei is the only molad that actually determines anything. For example, and well, I shouldn't say that. What's interesting is that Tishrei is the only month that we don't announce in Shul. So for example, this week, if we had had Rosh Chodesh based on the actual molad, Rosh Chodesh Nisan would have been on Tuesday, but instead it was today. So it was actually 2 days after the molad. Okay, so we're going to talk about the origin of the molad of Tishrei and why it's so important. So the rabbis have a tradition that Adam was created on the molad of Tishrei. The molad of Tishrei, according to their tradition, is 14 hours into the 6th day of creation, which of course was Friday. So because the 7th day was Shabbat. So therefore, Shishi 14 hours, which is Friday, 8 a.m. and 0 chalakim, because 14 hours after 6 p.m., which is the start of the idyllic day. So man was created, according to tradition, at Friday, 8 a.m., 0 chalakim. And we call that the molad of Tishrei for year 2, because the first year was the 6 days of creation. The second year only began with Rosh Hashanah, which was on Friday and Shabbos. It was actually a 2-day Rosh Hashanah when it was 2 days, and it was 2 days with one of the days being the previous year, and that's year 2. So year 1 was the 6 days of creation. Year 2 was Tishrei, was the first year of existence of man. So if year 2 molad Tishrei was 6 days and 14 hours, okay? So now we're going to calculate what the molad of Tishrei would have been for year 1, before the world was created, before there was a moon. So the moon was only created the 4th day of creation, and it's very weird to have a molad when there's no moon, but we calculate it anyway. So year 1 of the cycle, okay, is never a leap year. We know that from our 19-year cycle. Years 3, 6, and 8 are leap years, but year 1 is most definitely not. The length of a leap year, of a non-leap year, is 12 times 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim, which is exactly the length of a month. And we discovered this last week, 354 days, 8 hours, and 876 chalakim. But since we only care about the days of the week, because remember, the length of the year is determined by whether or not it's a leap year and what day of the week Rosh Hashanah falls out the year after. That's the only thing that determines how long a year is. We only have 6 options, and really we only have 3 options because we know if it's a leap year or not. So we can remove the weeks. We only care about days of the week. That leaves us with an annual leap year of 4 days, 8 hours, and 876 chalakim relative to the next year. So we subtract that from 6 days and 14 hours, which was the molad Tishrei of year 2, and the molad Tishrei of year 1 was 2 days, 5 hours, and 204 chalakim. We call this the molad of Baharad, or we call this the molad Tohu. 2 days, 5 hours and 204 chalakim. Ba for 2 days, ha for 5 hours, rad for 204 chalakim. So we call this molad tohu or molad baharad. And here's the deal. We now can use that molad of baharad to calculate any molad for any month forever. And that's what the rabbis do. So baharad plus 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim, which is a month, will give us any number of any molad for forever if we know the number of months that have happened. But we're going to make this much, 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 much easier. Each month, really, we can subtract 28 days from, because remember, we only care about what day of the week it happened. And so you subtract 29 days, you subtract 28 days from that, and you get 1 day, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim. Every month, the molad moves forward relative to the day of the week by 1.5 days approximately. We call this the molad shift. So what does this explain? This explains why Rosh Chodesh this month was on Thursday. Next month, the Rosh Chodesh will be on Friday and Shabbat.
That right.
What?
That right, Scott.
Yes. Every month it moves forward by about a day or two.
You going to Israel this Pesach?
Maury, can hold on. Can I mute you, Maury?
For a minute.
Okay. All right. So remember, we call this a molad shift. It means that every single month, the molad moves forward based on the day of the week by about a day and a half. But we can make this so much easier. We have I've put together a molad shift table. So this means that every month we gain 1 day, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim. Every 6 months, it's 2 days, 4 hours, and 438 chalakim. It's just simple math. Subtracting out, for example, in this case, 7 of the days, because 1 day plus 12 hours times 6 months will give you about 8 days and 4 hours. So that's how that happens. A regular year is 4 days, 8 hours, and 876 chalakim. A shana me'uberes, a full year, a leap year, will be 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 chalakim. And a full cycle, every 19 years, Rosh Hashanah moves forward. The Rosh Hashanah from one cycle to the next will move forward about 3 days.
Scott, I'm not seeing the charts. Are you?
You're not seeing the chart at all?
No.
Huh. Danielle, are you seeing the chart? Is anyone else seeing the chart?
His picture just disappeared.
Is anyone seeing the chart here?
Yes,
The one
God.
on the
Yes.
Are we talking the molad shift table?
Yes.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
I see it too.
Okay.
Is there something that I should be pressing to get it?
Maybe are you on a phone?
Yeah.
Maybe turn your phone sideways because it's not portrait. You're probably getting cut off on the side.
No, I've got it. I've got your picture and Rob's, and occasionally Danielle's.
You're not seeing my shared screen at all.
No. Well, you know what? I'll get it from you later. Just go ahead.
All right.
But could you do one thing? Could you define what molad is?
Molad is the point at which the rabbis determined the moon was at its lowest inflection. And so that's the point that's the exact point of the new moon. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Are you defining that as the moment of its transit or the first moment after the transit when it's finally new?
It's the moment of the transit.
Okay.
It's the minimal reflection. It doesn't actually matter. The difference is infinitesimal because there's only an infinitesimally small amount of time when there's a minimal amount, but it's not visible at this point. The molad does not determine when there's visible new moonness, when you can see any part of the moon. It's the point at which there's minimal reflection. So each year of a 19-year cycle has its own level of shift. And so that this table helps us to determine is when the molad will be for each of the years relative to year one. So if Rosh Hashanah on year one is on a Monday, Rosh Hashanah on year two will definitely not be on a Monday. And I can tell you that based on the offset here. So if Rosh Hashanah is on Monday, the offset for year two is 4 days, 8 hours, and 876 chalakim. In ordinary cases, Rosh Hashanah the next year, year two, will be on Shabbat. The next year, it will be on Thursday. And the next year, it will be on Tuesday, probably. So just based on which year of the cycle it is, you can determine what's going to happen. So let's try this for 5780. Okay, so 5780 divided by 19 is 304.21, or 304 cycles of 19 years plus 4 years, because we're in the 4th year. 304 times 2 days, 16 hours, and 595 chalakim. That's our molad shift for a full cycle. So we're multiplying out 304 times the 19-year cycle number, is equal to, and remember, we're subtracting out all of the days. Every group of 7 we're subtracting out is 5 days, 15 hours, and 520 chalakim. And then we had year 1 and year 2 were Shana Peshuta. So we know what that offset is, 4 days, 8 hours, and 876. That makes 1 day, 17 hours, and 672 chalakim. We also know last year was a Shana Muberes, so it was 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 chalakim. So if you add everything together there, you add the 5 days, 15 hours, 520 chalakim, to 1 day, 17 hours, 672 chalakim, and 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 chalakim, you get a total offset of 13 days, which really becomes 6 days, 6 hours, and 701 chalakim. And if you add that to Baharad, 2 days, 5 hours, and 204 chalakim, you get 1 day, 11 hours, and 805 chalakim, or 1 day, 11 hours, 50 minutes, and 5 chalakim. And let's look. So therefore, the molad Tishrei of 5780 should have been 1 day, 11 hours, 50 minutes, and 5 chalakim. And what does Chabad.org say? It's 1 day, 11 hours, 50 minutes, and 5 chalakim. Because, remember, we start from 6 p.m. and add 11 hours, which brings us to 5, 50 minutes, and 5 chalakim. So our calculation works. That's exactly what the molad was announced, or wasn't announced in this case. So Rosh Hashanah would have been on Sunday this past year, but we have a principle of lo adu rosh, so we push it off to Monday. And Rosh Hashanah, in fact, was on Monday this past year. Okay, so we have a little bit more time. I'm going to go for another 10 minutes or so. And I just want to go through the other 3 of the Arba Dechiot, the 4 rules that determine when Rosh Hashanah is and what type of year it is. So the first rule is called Molad Zaken. If the molad is after 18 hours into the day, which is 12 noon, then we push Rosh Hashanah off to the next day. So why is this the case? Well, there's a lot of theories as to why this is the case. We don't want the moon to be visible at all on Rosh Hashanah, on day 1 of Rosh Hashanah. That's the rationale. So there's a theory. You can't see the moon until 6 hours have passed after the molad. But the reality is you can't see it for much more than that after the molad, at least 18 hours. There's another theory. Really, they wanted to push it 18 hours, but because of the way that the international dateline works, and according to some opinions, the international dateline halachically is exactly opposite on the earth, or 12 hours opposite of Jerusalem. And so therefore, because you didn't want the moon to be visible at all on Rosh Hashanah day 1, anywhere in the world, up to 12 hours later, it could be visible and still Rosh Hashanah day 1 in American Samoa, before it moved to the other side of the date line. Therefore, 12 plus 6 is 18, so they didn't push it off. Okay. The other theory is that the molad is, of course, an average, and it can be up to 12 hours earlier, and therefore 6 plus 12 is 18. Okay, the answer is we really don't know why this is the rule, but it is the rule in fact. The second rule, and these get progressively more difficult to understand as we go along, so I'm going to try to explain them the best I can. The second rule is called gatrad bipshuta, and this is to prevent a year that was too long, okay? The rule is if the molad is on or after 9 hours and 204 chalakim on Tuesday, then Rosh Hashanah is pushed to Wednesday, which becomes Thursday because of Lo Adu Rosh, okay? So let's look at scenario number 1 to understand what happens if it's before 9 hours and 204 chalakim. So in this case, the molad is Shlishi 9203. Oh, somebody sent a chat. Okay. So it's on Tuesday, 9 hours and 203 chalakim. So this is not going to be happening with this. And then you add, because it's a Shana Peshuta, okay, you add that number that we have, the offset for a Shana Peshuta, which is 4 days, 8 hours, and 876 chalakim. And if you do that, you add up to 7 days, 17 hours, and 1,079 chalakim. Now, if you notice anything about that, that is right before the previous rule, which is Moled Zaken. So that means that Rosh Hashanah will be on Shabbos, because 7 days, 17 hours, and 1079 chalakim is still good for Shabbos. So therefore, you're going to have a regular year of 354 days. However, on the molad of 3 days, 9 hours, and 204 chalakim, if you notice the difference is comes out to 7 days, 18 hours, which means that Rosh Hashanah will be pushed off because of Moled Zaken to Sunday, but we can't have it on Sunday. So therefore, it's going to be pushed off to Monday. So that would mean that the year is 356 days long. So we do not allow that to happen. In that case, Rosh Hashanah this year will be pushed off until Thursday. Rosh Hashanah next year will still be on Monday because the rule applies. We can't avoid Lo Adu Rosh and Moled Zaken. And so therefore, this year will be Thursday, next year will be Monday, and therefore it works out as a 356. That will be a Shlemim year. So that's the first of the very complicated rules. The second rule is much more complicated, unfortunately. The second rule is Batu Tikbat Achar Ibur, which is a mouthful, which means that if the molad, okay, is on or after 15 hours, okay, and 589 chalakim on Monday, so the bet goes to Monday, that's the second day. 2 is the 15 hours, and tikpat is 589. In a year following the leap year, so that's last year was a leap year, this year the molad is then Rosh Hashanah is pushed off to Tuesday. So why is this the case? The case happens if the year before the leap year would actually be too short. So the molad this year is 5 days, 15 hours, and 588 chalakim. Note that that's one chelek short of the problem. Minus 5 days, 21 hours, and 589. That's the length of a Shana Mu'beres. That's the length of a leap year. Leaves us with last year, Rosh Hashanah was on 3 days, 17 hours, and 1079 chalakim. Okay? So because that's before Moled Zaken, Rosh Hashanah last year will be on Tuesday. This year, Rosh Hashanah is going to be on a Monday. again, because Rosh Hashanah on 2 days, 15 hours, and 788 chalakim is always on Monday. And Rosh Hashanah next year will be on Shabbat, because 4 days plus 6 days plus 2 days is roughly equal to 7 days. So everything works for that. However, in scenario 2, Molad is at 2 days, 15 hours, and 589 chalakim. That's our rule. And you subtract 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 chalakim, okay? That means that the Molad for the previous year was Tuesday at 18 hours. Now we have Moled Zaken, and we have Lo Adu Rosh, because Rosh Hashanah cannot be on Tuesday because of Moled Zaken, and it can't be on Wednesday because of Lo Adu Rosh, which means that Rosh Hashanah last year would have been pushed to Thursday. Rosh Hashanah this year is still on Monday. What the result is that's too short of a day, too short of a year. That's only 382 days, which is not possible. Next year is still not a problem, but this year is making last year too short. And therefore, we have this rule which says that we push this year's Rosh Hashanah off until Thursday because of Lo Adu Rosh. And therefore, this year and next year will both be Cheserim year, but it will work. Now, putting it all together, we know what Rosh Hashanah is each year. By knowing what day Rosh Hashanah is this year and knowing what day Rosh Hashanah is next year, we can therefore know what day Pesach falls, because Pesach is always 2 days earlier than Rosh Hashanah. And we can look at our list and we can tell which type of year it is, whether or not it's Cheserim, Kesidron, or Shlemim. So if we know that, for example, this year is a Monday and next Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbat, therefore this year is a Besha year because it's a Shana Peshuta that is a Bet and a Hey. Now, why no Gesha? And this is the last thing we're going to cover for today. A Gesha year. We just went back and we looked. Gesha is most definitely a possible year. It would mean that Rosh Hashanah is on Tuesday this year, and it's a Shleimim Shana Me'oberes, and next year Rosh Hashanah will still be on a Tuesday, because that's how Shleimim years in Shana Me'oberes work. But here's the math. The Molad for a Gesha year to happen for this year would have to be between noon on Tuesday, before noon on Tuesday. It has to happen between 2 days and 18 hours. That's Monday and 18 hours, so that the first rule of Moled Zaken will apply and push it off to Tuesday. And it has to be before 3 days, 17 hours, and 1079 chalakim. Otherwise, if it's at 3 days and 18 hours, then Moled Zaken will push it off, and then Lo Adu Rosh will also push it off to Thursday. So next year's Molad is 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 chalakim later. That's the Shana Me'oberes offset. So Gesha has to happen in a Shana Me'oberes, and we know what the offset of that is. If you add 2 days and 18 hours to 5 days, 21 hours, and 589, you get 1 day, or 8 days, 15 hours, and 589 chalakim. Rosh Hashanah is on Monday, if that's the case. 1 day, 15 hours, and 589 is clearly in the Monday level. 3 days, 17 hours, and 1079, which is the other extreme, plus the 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 chalakim, is equal to 2 days, with 9 days, 15 hours, and 588 chalakim. Rosh Hashanah is still on Monday. So in either of these extremes, the Molad happens to happen that Rosh Hashanah will be on Monday no matter what, and thus Pesach is on Shabbos. Therefore, every Shana Me'oberes, where Rosh Hashanah is on Tuesday, is always a Gekaz year. Always, 100% of the time. And so this is one of the reasons that Rosh Hashanah on Tuesday is actually the most uncommon day. And next week, we're going to talk about why the different abnormalities about the calendar, like which years happen the most frequently, which years happen the least frequently. And we'll learn that Tuesday is in fact the least common day. So here are 14 examples of each of the different types of years. You can look them up. I promise you those are those different types of years. They actually are those, and every type of year happens. There are certain years that are very, very uncommon. There are certain years that are very, very common. But it's not determined at all by when the molad is. It has to do with the dichiot. And that's where I'm going to end it for today. Are there any questions that people want to ask? We have about a minute and a half before my Zoom expires.